like to call to order our Board of Education meeting, April 17th, 2019. It's 4:30 and it's a special board meeting. Let's all stand for the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Roll call?
All right. Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler?
Yes.
Mr. Dozen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes.
And Mrs. Kramer is absent.
On our way.
On
On
her
her way.
Great.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
Item 2, work session. We have work session items. It's our canoe construction discussion. That's the only thing we're going to be covering, so let's go. So this came out of our last meeting. We we had our public engagement meeting, and during that public engagement meeting, there came about some concerns of our rooms not having the proper capacity. We had a slide that we weren't sure about the numbers, so Mr. Dozen and Joelle, Mrs. Magar, worked out the numbers and corrected them, and now we're going to be looking at those numbers, and we're going to discuss if we think we need to make some changes to our plan based on these numbers that we're currently seeing. We also will be discussing the resource room, and we will go over that. We have a slide to show you with that as well. So our first item, and hopefully, we can all come to a decision and help move things forward, but our first item will be the capacity of the rooms. That's okay.
Yeah, and Jeff pulled up the document. It's also in Board Docs. It's pulled up there, but it's the same thing up here. Yeah, Chris didn't get that light. So just everybody should have seen this already, but just to kind of get everybody grounded, and of course we're still waiting for Ellen to show up too. But so this is really you've got your grade level. The two TDA columns were the numbers that were on the presentation from TDA. Just kind of pulling it forward from our prior meeting, and then the next two columns, which are, it's hard to see, but they're light green, is current enrollment, which was as of April 10th. Per grade, and then the classrooms needed for target. So the target ratio, you can see the column target ratio, 16 to 1, 20 to 1, 23 to 1. Based on those target ratios, all I did was take the current enrollment and divide it by the target ratio to see how many classrooms you need. That's why you have like 11.3, 10.2. So that's where that number comes from. The biggest one is then the next two columns over. So these are the estimated enrollment for fall of 2021. So all I did was, and you see that in the notes, so like if you go down to second grade, since that's 2 years out from now, that 225, I pulled it forward from currently kindergarten, which is, this number up over here. So it's what we're at right now, because today's kindergarten. By the time we open the school, they'll be in second grade. So those numbers, 225, 235, 237, those are just pulled forward from our current enrollment. And I didn't make any kind of an assumption that those numbers would go up or down. It's just pulled forward. The bigger question becomes, what do you put in for kindergarten and first grade? And what we know right now is, Joelle had shared with us that our numbers of enrollment for kindergarten today are tracking way ahead of last year. So last year at this time we were at 184, now we're at 229. Those are the comments off in the red, off to the right. And so we don't know though if we're up 45, we don't know if that means the trend's going to keep going and we're going to, because we're going to get another 40 that register, or if a lot of people just for some reason registered early and it's going to taper off. So there isn't really a right or a wrong answer here. It's just a guess. So
because we had a lot registered really late last year, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
We had
A lot of
several
walk-ups
kids.
and
We
stuff
did.
almost.
not all of them were in kindergarten though. I mean, we probably, I can't remember the exact number, but I wanna say we like had 60 kids register between, like from August 1 to the time school started, but they were not all in kindergarten, it was district-wide.
Is there something that happened possible, was that Assumption it's not closed, is it? It's closing this year, Assumption?
It's not closing, it's just it's being managed by St. Albans.
Okay, so there wasn't
So it's
an
gonna remain
impetus.
open, it's just a
Okay.
partnership with St. Albans.
Okay, thank you.
So the number 250, all I did is, if you looked at last year, at this point, we got 40 more students registered. I just kind of cut it in half and said, okay, we got a lot, let's assume maybe a lot of them pre-registered. Cut it in half, came up with 20, threw it on to the 229, 230, to come up with 250. Checked with Joelle if that seemed like a reasonable number, and she thought it was. I mean, there isn't, again, this is just, it's guesswork. And then then landed at 250 and then says, well, let's just assume 250 for both years. So those are just purely estimates based on what I just walked through. So, we don't know what those are gonna be for real, but just to give us a starting point for discussion, that's kind of where those numbers came from.
There's 2 columns headed classrooms needed for target, but they have different numbers underneath. What is the difference? That one, and then if you go 2 to the right.
The enrollment.
So those 2 columns, you just came in a little bit. So these 2 are from the TDA presentation,
Right.
the numbers from there. These 2 are currently, as of right now today, here are the enrollment numbers. And if
Oh,
you
okay.
just line it up against these ratios, that's where you get these numbers.
Okay.
Right? And then these 2 are the estimate for what we think 2 years from now when the new building's gonna open. This is the same, the classrooms is just taking the ratio and dividing it into that number.
Okay.
So these numbers here are just pulled forward from up here, right? So today's kindergarten in 2 years when the building opens will be in 2nd grade. So that's where these numbers just got pulled forward with no assumption that they'll go up or down. And then the 2 numbers in red were the guesstimate that says, where we're at now is 229. We don't know what's gonna happen the rest of the way. Let's just assume another 20, which would take us to 250. Let's also assume next year it'll be the same at 250. But those are all debatable because it's just an estimate.
Okay. Thanks.
So in the column that's labeled classrooms, those are the current classroom numbers that are in the current plans. So we currently have planned for 11 classrooms in kindergarten, 11 in 1st grade, and then 10 in grades 2 through 5 with 4 preschool spaces.
So one suggestion I think what would be helpful is that, I think there's 2 conversations here. One is classrooms, which is what we're talking about now. Then there's resource rooms, which is another thread of a conversation, which we can separate those out.
Here's the other issue too, if we buy into the 250, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying if that's the case, that means then the 2nd grade, you're gonna need another classroom too, because they're gonna go there.
You're gonna follow it all the way
They're
down,
gonna,
right?
Pretty much. So in that case, that might be the only one that it's impacted, because by the time you get, I guess maybe 3rd grade too.
So it would go like this, you'd add 1 to each of these, like
You wouldn't need it down in 4 and 5.
No.
Because
But-
it's 25 to 1.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Maybe-
you'd be
maybe
all right
that-
there, but you'd have a problem in 2nd and 3rd.
But maybe that's where you should maybe start your conversation, if I may suggest, is look at the target ratios. Are you comfortable with those ratios? I mean, there's nothing magical about those numbers. Those were just ratios that, we
Right.
came up with. And so, so if you're comfortable with looking at the ratios in a different way, that ratio at 20 to 1 in kindergarten, if you're comfortable, and we've been trending the last 3 years, running 23 to 24 in our kindergarten, 22 if we're lucky. We've had a couple of complaints about, class sizes being that big, but overall, it's been 1 or 2, 3 complaints a year. And so, if you're comfortable pushing that ratio up at kindergarten to 22, which is, currently what we're using for our projections for this year, the numbers that we have sent you, we're looking at more of a 22. So if you push that up, that's gonna bring down your targeted need for classrooms. So that might be a better place to start your conversation and then decide on classroom space based on how you feel about those targets.
What have the teachers had to say about the size they're dealing with now?
The teachers are never happy getting over 20 or 22 kids in
Smaller
a
is better.
classroom.
Okay, well, I just wanted to.
I don't know anything about education, I can answer that.
Well, we had
The other-
had that conversation. Do you remember our target was actually 18
Well,
for
we-
kindergarten?
Yeah, we've been bouncing around and we wanted to keep it down. My question, again, as a non-educator, so I have no idea what the answer to this would be, but does the number of kids in that classroom, could it be different because now you have this joint area outside, you have more of a communal area, you know, so that you're not always with 25 kids in that one room? Does it make any difference? And again, I don't know, I'm just asking.
I just love the conversation with my colleagues, and we were talking about that, and we have these collaborative spaces. They are not used by the teachers. Now, that's something that, like Joelle has pointed out, that's something that, you kind of push as a doctrine, but it becomes the resource room. It becomes like a place for us to go do extra help, but it doesn't become a space for any teacher to ever go to. That's not what's happening, and a whole class, it depends what size that shared space is, but it's so loud in the hallways, you can't talk in the collaborative space very well, not direct instruction. It would have to be something where it's like, where you're doing something hands-on, but direct instructing, there's a nightmare because it echoes down the hallway, and then the bathrooms don't have doors, it's echoing out into there as well. So I don't know, even if you change how we look at education, I don't know that that's an easy thing for a first or second grade or third grade teacher to teach in, because there's so much messing around in the classroom as it is, and for you to try and give instructions, it'd be a little difficult. I can see half of your class going out there, but not for you to take your whole class and go out there. It's not really, it's not something that's done, at least where I work at. And that's just what happens.
I know the North Ridgeville people apparently, do they have a different approach to how they're utilizing it?
Yeah, they spent 2 years in professional development to learn how to deal with collaborative spaces and how to teach in that way. So they're basing their education on problem-based learning. So it's a lot of small group learning and kind of teachers mentoring on the side rather than lecturing. It's the way they chose to do it. They had teachers that didn't like it. It was change, and they were pretty strong in their response. And I think if you talk to the curriculum director, he'll tell you. He said, maybe our district's not right for every teacher, but we'll stand by our test scores steadily increasing and our kids achieving. So that's just, I'm agnostic in this. I'm just really relaying the experiences.
That's what I'm saying, those two different experiences, that's what I'm just wondering why they're so dramatically different. Is it a commitment from the administration that made the difference there? Which apparently it sounds like they kind of said, we're going to hold you
And
down
we're
to the wire.
shifting, and where I teach, we're shifting to a model much like theirs. But the thing is also, for that to be a daily activity for a teacher, there'll be reading time, it'll be 45 minutes, but most of the elementary teachers are gonna spend their time in their classroom. Still, even if you are collaborating, it's not gonna be a constant thing, because there's so much movement in a hallway that it's difficult. You have to go back in your room. So even if you are doing that new model, but that change, it's not gonna be a long period of time. It's a cold floor. You have to carry out your rugs, it's not, sometimes you'll have chairs out there and tables, but not for a whole classroom, because you wanna leave it open so they can get on the floor. But that's a long time to spend on a floor as well. And that's just what I see. So if you're looking for the relief of the ratio to come from that collaborative space, I would tell you from my experience, and even seeing where we're going, because I'm gonna be one of those people using that space and a lot, it's not gonna change it so I'm not in that full-time classroom more than maybe 2 hours. Maybe, and not not every day.
But
Just because we have to teach for the test.
Mhm.
And that is quiet, direct instruction sometimes. It's not, we do project-based learning where I'm at. We do that. I do it all the time for gifted. But it's still, you need that desk and that smart board and that time with the paper, because that's how they're gonna have to perform on a test. So we're gonna spend about 3 hours of our day working on those sort of things so we can have them do well on a test. It's not gonna be all project-based, and I hear what Mr. Smith's saying. However, those teachers, I would not believe we're spending more than 2 hours of their day. So what's disappointing to me is the ratios. I remember being on this board and, you know, trying to set some really good targets, and we're inching up towards, we're at the ceiling, is what I remember. The ceiling was, gosh, I don't even think it was 25, but remember with Dr. Kalovic, we spoke of this, and she had this red and the color coding. And,
Well, yeah, you know.
and we're at the ceiling of the target, is what I
Yeah,
remember.
and where, if you remember, was what happened was back in the Great Recession, when we had 3 levy failures and the district had to make a lot of cutbacks. One of the elements that came out of that was higher, student to teacher ratios. And so when we started having declining enrollment, when people would ask, like, well, wait a minute, your enrollment's declining, where's the cost savings? What we did is we ended up bringing those ratios down. So we didn't let go of staff, we just kept our staff constant and brought the ratios down to kind of hit those targets. So that's just kind of a refresher, maybe for Ellen and Fred that weren't on the board at that time. So that's how we kind of got down. Let me ask Joelle these ratios. I mean, these weren't just, I know there's latitude in them, but I'm assuming there's some educational underpinnings to some of these ratios, at least the theme, right? Obviously, the younger, the smaller the ratio. You know, are these, can you speak at all to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna ask Chris, you know, kind of where we came up with these numbers, because, you know, these are your ratios, but I can speak to student-teacher ratio. There's a lot, I mean, you go find research, you can find research on either end, and, you know, Hattie, who is, looks at 375 affects to education, actually put this out there first and said, look, there's very little affect between class size and student achievement. So, you know, what has the biggest impact on student achievement? It's relationships, teacher-student relationships. It's not class size. So, you know, he would advocate you stick as many kids as you can in front of your best teachers that can build those relationships. So there is, a little bit of research that says, especially at the lower grades, when kids are learning to read, that class size can have a minimal impact on that, but it could. More so with your kids who might be struggling with reading. So your kids who are picking things up that are average or above average, it's not really going to matter so much, but if you do have kids that are struggling with certain skills, that's smaller size. But typically what happens when you have kids that are struggling, they're identified early and they're usually pulled into groups. And the way we teach here in our district, especially at the K2 level, is it is a guided reading approach. So the rest of the class might be doing something, an activity, and then the teacher is working with those kids in her class that are at the same level in a small group to provide that direct instruction at their level that they need, and then they'll pull the other group that might be at a different level. And so the teachers do a really nice job, specifically in the younger grades, with that skill building of pulling together kids with like skills and teaching accordingly, which is in a small group within the context of their larger class size.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on the ratios?
The ratio came from the district because, and I just can't remember where. It was probably in our discussions, but I think, if this was a state co-funded school, we'd be at 25 to 1 on everything.
Okay.
And
That's the state's.
It is, the state standard is 25 to 1.
Okay.
The room sizes actually, like when we talk about building capacity, they're actually sized for 37 people. So that's just, don't let the size of the room affect your decision. It's really student-teacher ratio.
That might have been that red and green and blue chart. Okay.
Is it from that?
Yeah.
Okay, it's from the
I
chart.
mean, that's where we had the targets on
Yes.
that.
That had to have been where it came
Yeah.
from.
Well, here's the thing, because I was talking to Mr. Dozen earlier today about, like, if we think it'd be prudent to add a couple extra classes in certain grades. I go to Chippewa, I've seen the other elementaries. Classes get utilized, we do use them. Very rarely were they sitting vacant, and if they were, they shouldn't have been. I mean, somebody should have been using that as a collaborative space because it was open. And so I'm just wondering, is it such a bad decision to try, you're seeing numbers that you see you're pushing the ceiling, that we need to try and find spaces. And if they end up not being that, then we'll use them for something else. You know, that's the way I'm looking at that.
All right, again, we're in the balance thing that we've been talking about now for a while, how much money goes to this and how much money goes to the others, you know, the other renovation stuff that we're talking about. The other thing I would just say, and this is just a general trend thing, all right, this is a United States trend, much less, you know, Northeast Ohio, birth rates are going down. And unfortunately, I think the US this year is gonna be under 2, which is not good for our economy. But I don't see immediately that jumping back real big. So to me, part of what we should be thinking about is what's the max number we're gonna, you know, what's the size of the pig that's gonna go through the snake, the biggest one, because there won't be a bigger one later. I'm just saying that there's gonna be one lump, but it's not gonna get bigger than that. And so that, we should kind of weigh that we
Right.
don't overreact. And again, I'm not saying we are, but, you know, I would be shocked if the numbers ever got above whatever we now decide is kind of the theoretical max we're gonna see.
Well, it would be contrary to what all of our enrollment projections told us, which
Yeah.
is downward trend, not, you know, slow
Precipitous.
downward trend.
Yeah.
So this blip now, we don't know, is this an anomaly? We don't even know if it's gonna be 250, right? Maybe we get 2 more enrollments for the rest of the way, and it's not a big deal, but, you know, obviously this would, if this is a sign of a, you know, a blip or a change, at least for a few years, and you open the building and you don't have enough classroom space, that, you know, then that doesn't look good either,
Yeah,
right?
no,
Because
it's-
like, what are you guys doing? Why didn't you build enough? So, right, it is, it's a balancing act, you know, if you add extra class. One thing that we do know is that if we hold the line, right, and enrollment, this is a trend, and it starts going back up, then, you know, it's gonna be a challenge to fit everybody in there.
Now, I still believe, I'm just gonna throw this out there as an option, that we have already essentially eliminated one of the options that we have that we can still use in the future, which is the pre-K area. You know, if it really got down to a problem, we could still move pre-K into Blossoms. And so,
Right.
to my mind, I'd almost rather not overbuild. And again, I'm not saying I'd even vote this way because I know we're voting on what
Right.
we're gonna talk about, but, you know, I look at that as capacity surge. And knowing we have the ability to do something about it, then building in capacity there necessarily, then you're locked into, it's gonna be maybe spaceship, you know.
Well, let's ask Chris, what if, you know, let's say it's like completely unexpected, but enrollment keeps growing, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, we don't have enough space. I know some of the pod areas and stuff, there's some flexibility, you know, for the blip. But if this is like, oh my gosh, this is a new trend, how challenging would it be to take all or part of the pre-K space and say, we want to, you know, we want to annex this into classrooms for K through 5?
I think it's very easy to do. I think that there's 2 other ways that most districts deal with bubble classes and enrollment growth and that kind of stuff. And we have to remember, and I think the presentation that we showed last week shows 2/3 of the building empty when you've got these students. So you deal with the scheduling. And then also, you know, if you get a blip of 25 kids in one grade one year, that's only adding 1 child per classroom. In the upper grades, you're 26 instead of 25, and you've accommodated that bubble class without having to actually build more classrooms and add teachers and that kind of stuff, because there's the expense of teachers as well.
Well, and let's, the pre-K, I mean, it's set, the little sinks are shorter, they're totally different, the bathrooms are shorter.
Yep.
Everything is shorter, everything is different, so for us to just say, well, we're just gonna move, you know, kids down there, I'm not sure, because then you're moving 1st grade to a kindergarten, and then I don't know that that's really the option you wanna consider, because those rooms are pretty specialized for the preschool.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Mike's point, it's really, what we're talking about is a scenario that is very unlikely to happen. Out of all the due diligence we did, out of all the enrollment projections we did, out of what Mike talked about, which we all know birth rates are going down, people are getting married later, having less kids, right? All that tells us and Northeast Ohio in general, right? All of that tells us points in one direction. So what we're saying is what happens if that's not the case? And all we're talking about is in a totally unexpected scenario like that, what would we do? What could the district do?
And even if you look at the way things currently are, with 5th grade at 285, 4th grade at 269, 3rd grade 243, come over, look at in 2 years from now, it's 243, 237, it continues the trend steadily down. Not a bunch, but steadily down.
I mean, I'll go back to the target ratios just for your consideration. If you went with the state model, which is 25-1, and changed those ratios to 25-1, you are right where you want to be in terms of
Right.
numbers of classes. So really, you know, are we talking about looking at needing extra space, or having a conversation about what we can tolerate as a ratio? Because if you can tolerate, and I'm not saying we get there at kindergarten. We would do our, you know, we have an extra classroom to play with at kindergarten and 1st grade that we could work through, because those are projected numbers. I don't think we're ever going to hit 250, but they're a projection. We would do our due diligence not to hit the 25, but if you were comfortable just switching all of those ratios to 25-1 as a means of how many classrooms do we need, knowing full well that the capacity of a classroom is 37, we would never stick 37 kids in a classroom. We're not going to do that. 25 is what the state uses. It's a reasonable amount of children for teachers to educate effectively. Then you can look at a 25-1, and the classrooms that are in that building are currently then what you need based on that decision.
And the unforeseen, the other option would be to what we talked about already, which is you push 5th grade up to the middle school.
Yeah, Jeff, just remind me.
I mean, again, the bottom line is the district has capacity to deal with
Well, you
the
could go to
unexpected.
Blossom, you could go to Blossom, you could use Blossom in that thing, as long as you're not,
Potentially,
if that's a
right.
bubble situation, there's a lot of other options you could use.
Right. I mean, this is all very beneficial conversation, because we're talking about the what ifs and what really happens, right? Because, you know, the other side of this is that if we choose to add more classroom space, we already have budgetary constraints, so we're just adding more pain into that area, which is like, okay, now what are we gonna do? Because now we're already trending higher than we want on where this building's gonna come in.
Well, do we wanna have closure on this conversation, move to the next one, leave it where it is right now, talk about the resource room, and then come settle back? Would that be
Yeah, I
a
would
good
suggest
way of
we
doing this?
take the pulse of the board on where they're at. You know, do we want to, you know, where we're at, we talk through some of this, it seems like it's going in a certain pathway, maybe see where everybody's at.
I think we're good.
I still wanna have a conversation about the resource rooms.
Oh, right,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, no,
we're just
that's
talking
fair.
about the classroom.
Just-
So, like, to me, they are
Number of classrooms.
inter-
Right, no, we're just
Okay.
on the classroom.
Yeah, I know, I see them kind of intertwined in a way, but in a different way, but, yeah, I'm okay giving her options with this. I'm still okay with it.
I am too.
Yeah, I'm fine too. So it sounds like classroom-wise, the board is providing direction that we just stay with the design the way it is, the number of classrooms.
Don't say I told you so.
I didn't think
We owe it to our public to have these
Yeah,
conversations,
that's
so.
good.
Okay, we're gonna move on to item 2, which are the resource rooms. Jeff, I sent you something to make you decide. Are you able to pull that up possibly?
Absolutely, just, yeah,
And then Joelle sent some information in her board update. I couldn't, yeah, it was as I'm driving, so I couldn't turn it in. I received this information from our last meeting, our public engagement meeting. I worked with one of our special educators to come up with these numbers, so this is where these numbers came from for the resource room discussion. Joelle provided a lot of information to us about what actually a resource room is and how that works. We could recap on that if you would like, so we can all get a basic understanding. The concerns my takeaway, the concerns were the amount of people in a room at a certain time, because there's a lot of specialists that will be in that room. So the idea is, the recommendation
our educator was that we actually add additional resource rooms in spots. And here's the thought process that was coming into play. And this is my takeaway, and Joelle, please, I mean, add in. But what I have seen is, when children are identified for, and have special requirements for us to educate them, they usually are not identified until a later grade. So you'll have your struggling readers, possibly children struggling, but the whole process takes a while. Usually starts hitting really in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, okay? And I don't know if this is what happens in Brecksville, but this is what I've seen in the 3 districts I've taught in. And so these numbers tend to bubble up. And whether we're over-identifying or not, or what the reason is, the number does get larger as the grades go on. So the educator asked that we add more resource rooms in the, the other grades that are where we see the more identification. So that's where I'm gonna start this discussion. That's it. So Joelle, what are your thoughts on that? What happens in Brecksville?
What happens in Brecksville? So, right now, many of our teachers who are special ed teachers, they have the ability to have their own room because we have space. But resource room is actually a service, it's not a place. So if a student requires resource room, what that means is they require a small group instruction on a specific skill level. In many other districts too, you'll have multiple grades being serviced at the same time because maybe you have kids in 3rd grade that are at the same level as kids who are in 4th grade. So you might bring those kids together because it's about skill level and meeting the needs at their skill level. That service doesn't necessarily need to take place in a specific room, it just needs to take place for a certain amount of minutes. That's what the law requires. Resource room by definition are for those kids that might be a little bit more profoundly handicapped that need that space. They might have aids that come with them that are captured on their IEPs, and they might need some more specialized instruction because they have specialized needs. The way we are currently using our resource room for 4th and 5th grade is that you have kids who might be identified with a specific learning disability. Their needs require that small group kind of setting where they're getting serviced, and it just so happens that that teacher has a room to provide that, so it's called a resource room. So when you look at services, the services or the identifications of the kids actually kind of dictate what their service needs are. So those numbers are what you see. You can see a huge jump from 3rd grade to 4th grade in terms of identifying kids when we get to 4th grade. So if you look at the numbers, from 3rd grade, that's over 3 buildings. And then when we get to 4th grade, we're jumping up, and that's the number of kids that we have identified now in that grade level. Part of our issue here in Brecksville, it's a little bit of a programming issue. Through RTI, those kids that are struggling in either reading or mathematics or one of the 7 disability categories should be identified by 2nd grade. They should be identified because what we know is that kids after 2nd grade, if they have a reading disability, it's going to take you that much longer. It's going to take them that much longer to catch up. So if we're not catching it by 2nd grade and providing that intervention that is needed, those kids are going to struggle. And so part of our issue is kind of some professional learning that we need to do with our special ed staff on looking at that RTI model, making those decisions sooner, and really putting some great interventions in place at the earlier grades so that we don't have a bubble at 4th and 5th grade when the kids get there. They should be identified much sooner than that. So for those kids, part of it was also the way we service, that when those kids were coming out of 3rd grade, and we had this service available in 4th and 5th grade at Central, those kids that was written into their IEP that they needed those resource services. Really, ideally, least restrictive environment, which is a legal term through special ed, you are required to educate kids in their least restrictive environment. And what that means is if they have special needs, you bring them in for the amount of service that they require, but you put them right back out in the general population as much as possible, or a special needs teacher comes into the regular classroom and they work with their special needs kids within the context. Because what you don't want to do for special needs kids is pull them out and teach them differently than their grade level content. They are still responsible for that. So in most cases with kids who have specific learning disabilities, their least restrictive environment, unless they have some profoundly you know, a profound disability should be in the context of the regular classroom with some support. We also should not be providing direct resource room services in science and social studies. There's no disability categories in science and social studies. Those kids might have a disability in reading, so therefore they can use science material to help teach those skills, but there shouldn't be science and social studies resource room. Currently in those numbers, some of those kids are getting that service in that resource room that way. And so again, it comes back to some of the programming issues. We've got some work to do, absolutely. You know,
So hold on right there, here's the thing though. So if a child has a reading disability, they're gonna have trouble reading their science book and their social studies book.
Sure.
So maybe the teacher's not providing direct instruction in that spot, but they can't read
Sure.
that, so they have to pull them out, and it's hard in a large classroom. I mean, what you're supposed to do and what's best for kids isn't always the same thing, so they're pulling them out so they can help them read the textbook and get the content. It can't happen with 25 kids. So I'm empathizing with the situation because I'm seeing what's actually happening, and I know teachers are using those other subjects that they don't have to teach reading, because it's just one more opportunity. So that's my thought on the science and social studies.
So during their reading services, so let's say they have 90 minutes of reading services, they need to use the science and social studies material to teach those skills they need to read. And so then when the kids go back in class, and maybe it's front-loading vocabulary. So, you know, the science vocabulary is much harder than, you know, some others. So use your reading instruction of how you're teaching kids to decode, use the science material to do so. Doesn't necessarily mean they're teaching science in a resource room, because then you're pulling the kids out from their peers, and there's laws that dictate how much time, you know, if you get 60 minutes of service, that other 40 minutes needs to be with their typical peers back in those classrooms. So, you know, are we meeting those ratios as well too, in making sure that special needs kids are having enough exposure to kids that are not special needs?
So what these teachers are also doing, just because I had a conversation with this educator, they're also taking typical children with them that are not identified, and they're working with those kids, whether they're supposed to or not. It's good for kids. So they're not actually being removed from their peers. Those kids are coming with those kids who need extra help in that recess room, and it's one more opportunity to specialize the education that we're providing. So that's what's happening. It's not just those kids, and that's happening on an ongoing basis in our district.
So, a question I have on capacity, so when we see resource room, you know, because I know there's a cap of there's a legal cap on 16 that you can have in a resource room, is that?
Yes.
So are these resource rooms designed to accommodate 16, more, less?
They're a little bigger. I mean, they can certainly accommodate more. There's 600 square feet, I believe. There's 600 plus. 600 plus, but there's one of those larger spaces to accommodate that. But there's also small group rooms, there's small tutoring spaces, and that's kind of, the collaborative area can be used for that. There's a lot of other spaces where that activity can happen. Most districts are doing what Joelle's talking about, pushing in instead of pulling out. I mean, that's a drive statewide.
That may change
Sure.
at any point in time, because it always does.
One thing in
cycles.
education, it always changes.
Always
right?
in cycles, so that's what we're doing currently, so yeah.
Sure. So I think that there's a lot of different spaces you can do that in. But once again, I'm 100% agnostic. If you want to add
Is there, what are you spoke at one of the prior meetings about the new dividing walls are so much better, they're easy to put in place, they have better sound qualities, and they're just as good as a regular wall, so to speak. So, given the advancements in those movable partitions, does it make sense to make the let's say the resource room bigger, and then how many spaces can you use to, is a divider just to cut it in half, or can you cut it in quarters? Can you know what I'm saying? Like, can you just take a big, so then the district has more flexibility with, we're gonna use, we're gonna put 16 on this side and 16 on this side, we're in essence gonna have one resource room is gonna be 2, or if we want to do the small pull out, we'll put.
There's actually a model classroom that's set up like that. It's the size of a regular classroom, but there's 2 doors. and the two doors go in, there's a divider going down the middle, and they're actually mirrors of one another, so there's actually two teaching walls and so on, that's the way it works. They're expensive, right, because you're paying for the divider, you're paying for the two doors, they're slightly larger than a regular classroom, but they can be subdivided into smaller areas to be able to service. You wouldn't want to service 16 and 16, but you could subdivide it and get two smaller spaces out of it, and that may be a solution you want to think about.
So then you wouldn't have to walk across the person's, their room. It's a vertical thing. It's a total small separation.
Separate door coming in and out.
Offhand, what would be the cost of something like that? You say it's expensive, like ballpark it.
Oh gosh.
We're talking about $40 million, it's not gonna matter what he said.
No, because I
Absolutely
do
is.
have a point of what a
Okay,
resource
all right.
room costs, so
All right.
I was just
It's-
wondering.
Yeah, it's about $20,000 by the time you get the door and.
Okay.
stuff.
Per opening.
Yeah.
Okay, and to build a resource room, would you say it's roughly around 175,000?
Yep.
Is that enough? So if we wanted to go in that direction, say, we want another resource room, it'd be 20,000 to do what you're talking about, but it'd be 175,000 for
I
you
think
to.
it'd be a little more than 20 though, just in
Around,
my
well,
opinion,
yeah.
just,
A
because if
little
you're talking
more.
about extra doors, extra
Okay.
openings, steel for the.
That's
thing.
just the partition.
Yeah, that's 20,000 just the cost of partition, so you're probably talking by the time you're said and done, $40,000 to $50,000 per classroom to be able to do this in.
Properly, yeah, your sprinklers and everything.
Yeah.
But does that include increasing the square footage? Because you couldn't do it in a 600 square foot room.
Could.
You'd have to,
No,
so
we
it'd
have to
be
make it
additional
bigger.
cost to
What-
make that room bigger.
One of our other challenges would just be the general geometry of the classrooms. Right now, they're kind of set up with the same module to the other classrooms because they basically pair up to it. So the figure classroom is 750 square feet and it's got X dimension as its length. And then you've got a resource room which also has X dimension. It's narrower this direction. So to split that evenly
Right.
creates a little bit of a geometry issue that we'd have to work through and mitigate. So that might be
I wouldn't
another-
even, it's a design issue.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
regardless of the decision you're on, unless the decisions leave everything the same, we will redesign
Yeah, we
it,
can,
so.
yes.
One thing for a frame of reference, just counting ceiling tiles, this is a 600 square foot room with a dividing wall down the middle, plus or minus a couple square feet.
That's
Just
great analysis, yeah.
For whatever that means to anybody, but we sit here and throw these numbers out and it's like, what does that mean?
Well,
If
here's
I
the
put
thing.
16 kids in it.
I wanna go back, and I don't wanna go over Mrs. Kramer's, she had her hand up. But you said you were talking about sprinklers. The room's gonna have sprinklers anyways.
Yeah,
So you'd have to, you're saying you may have to, because you have to have a certain amount
Right.
per square foot, probably, okay, so.
And we have to account for the divider being closed and it operating as two different rooms. So
Right.
there's gonna be more mechanical stuff that happens to get air into both of those rooms, and it's got to function as a standalone classroom, but then also function as where you may only, I'll just use an example, let's say you need 3 vents for an open classroom, but you're gonna need 4 if you subdivide it, so you have 2 on either side, stuff like that.
So if you designed the room with in mind that that would be its potential, wouldn't that be easier, possibly? That you would subdivide it here, you'd subdivide it here, but we're gonna keep it as a large room.
Yeah, what do you mean by easier?
Like you knew that we were gonna retract this at times. So you would have the sprinkler set up already in that way, am I wrong?
No, that's what we're
We
saying.
design
That would be
that
the
way.
extra cost, yeah.
You would just design it that way,
Correct.
with that in mind,
So there'd
or
be
that
additional-
might happen.
Correct, so
Right.
there would be additional cost to do
To
that.
set it up that
Yeah,
way, but
right.
cheaper than another room. That's
Absolutely.
true.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could potentially take some of those other small, I don't know where the layouts are, but some, consume some of that other small breakout space, put it into the resource room to make it larger, and then put in the,
You could try, yeah.
Potentially,
I mean,
we're just
we have to
looking what-
We'd have to figure it all out and how it works, but yeah, potentially you could get rid of one of the other spaces to do this, or you've got the option of making it a little bigger and adding space to it.
Yeah, you get the common space, so if they eat up some of that,
Well, keep in mind too, the way it's designed with those other small rooms, I'm gonna go back to those competing priorities. So if we make the resource room bigger, then we're gonna hear again from the ESL teachers and the Title I and the SLPs that all have those spaces and go, hey, wait a minute, you just took our space, so.
don't expand into the digital art room.
I know. But I'm just saying, so when thinking about this, it might not be practical, or you might get another, teacher coming up and saying, you took Nolly's space now to give it to the resource room, and I don't know if we wanna get in that kind of,
it's
debate.
trade-offs.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah, it's all
So,
trade-offs.
if that is something that you wish to do, either the dividers but make that room you know, bigger, it is gonna cost a little, but, I mean, that's your call, no problem, but I don't know if taking somebody else's space in the building to accommodate this want is maybe the right thing to do, because then you're just gonna hear from those people.
Can I add one quick thing? I think based on where the resource rooms are, there are spaces in close proximity. For example, in like the 2-3 wing, it's located right next to our two biggest classrooms that are in the 2-3 wing. So those two classrooms are slightly bigger than all the rest of the classrooms. You could, in theory, absorb a little bit of the extra square footage that are in those two classrooms into that resource room and potentially make that bigger. I think that, as Chris mentioned, these are design issues that we could work through. If there's a kind of desire to push one direction or the other, we can help facilitate that, you know, and really look at those areas. But I think there's flexibility, and I don't think we have to say that we're getting rid of, you know, one of those other rooms in order to do it. We could look for those spaces.
Well, and just from an education standpoint, the resource rooms are used, tenor rooms are used, but kids come in and out. Resource rooms are used by the same children. Now, you may add to that population, like I was saying, you bring typical kids in, but it's a different function, and the way I see it, we need to do better with our special education population and by them. And the thing is we want them to come to Brecksville and stay. We don't want them to want to leave and look for other services that they believe are potentially better. So in my mind, it is motivational to me to want that population to stay, because there's actually a cost, there's a value to it, the way I see it. We want them to like our services.
Well, and I think, Chris, you mentioned this a couple of different times about, you know, you don't want to design our own policy. You want to be as flexible as you can. So, you know, we heard about how some of our educational process works today, and it's an opportunity to potentially change it, you know, and change can be hard. And so I guess my question is, after hearing this conversation, you know, are there any design adjustments we could make to introduce a little more flexibility, so that if we did want to keep doing what we did today, because that's the direction we wanted to go, that the building wouldn't be holding us back from that?
Yeah, so I would encourage the direction from the board to be, let's look at one of those, at our resource rooms and look at the flexibility of dividing them into two, and give that to us as a design challenge, and try to fit it within the existing square footage, and let us go back and work at it. You know, you'll pay a little bit extra for a movable wall, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, we're fighting a huge budget challenge. I get it, but I think that's a legitimate solution to the teachers' concerns last week. It's a very responsible, flexible, fits right in keeping with our educational visioning session and everything about being flexible and planning. So that would be just from hearing that would be my suggestion.
So where would you suggest, I guess, that you would want to see those flexible spaces? Because if you look at numbers and what we currently have in the design in terms of resource, and I just want to remind the board, this is outside of the resource rooms that are for our profoundly disabled students. We have 3 of those rooms already in the building too. So this is just for kids that would be coming in and out. It's not rooms that kids would actually necessarily be staying in all the time too. So based on that, if you look at the current numbers, and if you think about the 16-to-1 ratio, you know, we have 7 kids currently in kindergarten, so that they could be serviced in one room. And, you know, if you look at the numbers even up into 3rd grade, there's 14, that still requires one room. So are you looking at this specifically just for the 4th and 5th grade, or are you asking for that flexibility in all of those resource rooms?
You talked about, you know, being able to identify those kids at an earlier stage. What will that do to the numbers? Will those larger numbers just become larger in smaller grades and then carry, you know, on through, or because that would affect, you know, how we want to.
Sure. And Fred, I don't know how to answer that, because we have to dive into what our program needs is. What sticks out for me as just, you know, being a former special ed director too, how we go from 14 and we double our numbers of identification in 4th grade. That's, you know, where you see a slower trend. If you look kindergarten, we have 7, in the 1st grade we have 7, then we go to 11, so maybe 4 kids more. That is a huge jump, and so for me that's concerning. And so I need to research why that happens and why that is more, and before I can feel comfortable giving you an answer.
See, that really impacts the answer. how many different grades?
I mean, I can speak to, on a personal level, why I've seen that happen, and that's because, you know, our current building structure is K through third, and it's a very nurturing environment. Fourth grade, even though it's another building, it's also a cultural change that says the students now have more work, the workload ramps up, responsibilities ramp up, and for those students who were, you know, who may need some extra help, they were okay up to third grade. You know, they were brought along, it was okay, but then that fourth grade hit and it's like, wow, you know what, what's going on? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's the problem, you know, there's a special need. And so that's likely why that jumps so much. Now, we're all gonna be in one building, but, and so there's a big question mark, right? Is there gonna be a cultural shift between third and fourth grade when you're all in the same building? Probably nowhere near the way it is today.
But I don't
But
know
if
if
the
it was
workload
cultural.
steps
It's the
up,
work, it's the workload.
you're
not
likely
cultural.
still gonna hit that, you're probably gonna hit that, where a lot of students hit the wall and say, I can handle the homework load and all of the workload up through third grade, but in fourth grade and fifth grade steps up, then you're gonna flush out more kids who are like, I'm drowning here, and it's because you need special services.
Can I just get an idea of how the, like I realize what's up on the screen now is like kind of an ideal, how this compares with how the design is currently formatted, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I mean, we've got one essentially resource room for K1 and then one for each grade after that. So in kindergarten, we don't have a specific resource room. It's just
Okay.
one shared for K1, and then it's one for second, one for third, one for fourth, and one for fifth.
Okay, all right.
I mean, one option possibly, I'll just throw this out here, is if, I mean, second and third are stacked, fourth and fifth are stacked. I would say put one on the first floor of which is what, second grade, I guess, wing, that can be divided. That adds another one for that group. And do the same thing on the ground, probably it's fourth grade, I think it's first floor probably, and then, so that fourth and fifth add theoretical divided room one, so that then that total would be, instead of 4, which is shown there, it would be 3, I guess, or 2 is what we have there in fourth grade now? So we don't, we have one for each,
we have
right?
one
Yeah.
for each.
So we divide it, so instead of the 4,
Yeah,
yeah,
she's
we have
saying-
3, because we'd have 1 and then 1, 1. Kind of.
So Mike, say what you were saying.
Again, all I was saying from a geometry point of view, second and third grader stacked, if we put one dividable resource room in that stack, that would allow second and third grade to share that as they needed it. I imagine put it on the first floor, I don't know. And then fourth and fifth grade, take one of their existing ones and make it dividable, so it won't hit the 4 that's there, but it hits the 3. And plus, again, as Joelle said, we have other little rooms, we have stuff going on,
Sure.
you know, I mean, that would effectively add, right?
So real quick, in addition to the resource room, of course, we have 2 Title I classrooms, so 1 per grade. And then you've got an ELL, SLP, you got an ELL room, you've got an SLP room, you've got a sensory room for every grade. And then you've got a conference room, each one of those.
Well, let's explain, I mean, because not everybody's educators, you know, the sensory room is for a special child, nobody's going to be using that, but those special children. So that's not
Situational
something
room.
that's shared.
Mhm.
And then, you know, Title I, we may cross, you know, same kids.
Mhm.
And then what was the other one you said?
ELL.
ELL, that's a special population of kids, so those kids generally are not the children who are identified for the resource room because they have something else that they're working on, which
Right.
is their language barrier.
And-
So they are not, those are, you know, to say we have those, that's still not solving this
And we-
problem necessarily.
And I'm sorry, just to ground everybody and also for anybody who might, you know, wanna watch this meeting, can we briefly describe Title I, ELL, SLB, like we've got all these room designations, but they're very education centric, so.
Sure, so,
Somebody,
you want to, Joel?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
sure.
SLPs are speech and language pathologists, and they provide services to kids who have that on an IEP. And it could be, typically they get a certain number of minutes per week, and usually it's right around 30 to 45, and they can work with up to groups as large as they want. We typically run about groups to about 6 kids we'll service at the same time. for speech. ELL is English language learners, and it's for kids where English is not their first primary language, and so they require services based on how they score on an English language learner test that they take each year. As they test and they do better, they might not need as much services. So in other words, kids can score a 1 through 5. If they're 1 to 2, they might get direct services in ELL. But once they get up to 4 and 5, it might be a consult. So the ELL teacher might go in and work with the regular teacher and say, okay, how's he doing? Great. That, we're good. We're consulting with you on some accommodations. And Title I services really are, it's a federally funded program. It's for kids who are identified that might be low socioeconomics, that are struggling in reading, and we can we can provide Title I services to them. Small group reading instruction should they require those services.
And those children are not special needs children who have an IEP, Title I children as
No,
well.
not necessarily, but we can't pick and choose services. So if a child qualifies for Title I, ELL, SLP, we have to provide all of those services. So you might have a child who's getting 4 or 5 services just because they qualify in all of those categories.
But we have dedicated spaces for all 3 of those.
Correct.
And that's what
How many hours in a day are they occupied for that specific purpose?
It depends on the numbers. And so right now, we have spaces where we have traveling teachers that go to different buildings. So we have one teacher that might service like 100 ELL kids, but only maybe 20 of those require direct services. So she might be only needing that space depending. When they're all in one building, just because we won't know what those numbers look like, we want space for them to have to work if they have to. The whole idea of the design of this building was to keep kids in one spot as much as possible. So right now, kids might travel to the complete other side of the building depending on where that ELL teacher is stationed or Title I services are. So here in this kind of concept of putting the grade levels, if they need ELL services, it's right there in their pod. If they need Title I service, it's right there in their community. They don't have to travel throughout the building.
But still, in an 8-hour day,
It's possible that some of those rooms are not being utilized at certain times, absolutely, but it's gonna be dictated by numbers.
yeah, but assuming you knew the numbers ahead of time, you had all the facts.
Sure.
You can plan when you deliver the services, right?
Absolutely.
So in theory, you could say, I know by, we're gonna go from 8 till 2.
Staggered.
Right.
And then from 2 on,
Right.
if somebody wants to do, resource.
So let me just put so for example, ELL teachers have to start, it takes them almost 4 months to test, and they'll start in February. They have to be in a closed room and test, it's not air testing, but it's to see their gains for the year. It takes that woman pulling them in, spending 4 hours and in that room and going through. So you figure if the woman in Brooklyn started in February, she told me she's not gonna be done till right before school ends. And she doesn't have a population larger than 20. So it takes her that long. That's how labor intensive that test is to give. So and the speech pathologist, she has special equipment. She has to close her door. The kids have to be able to hear her. So to say, let's share your room, she may not be in there, but it's not gonna be the same, she has her own equipment and stuff. It's not something she necessarily carries with her. So I'm not sure if we're looking to use those rooms sometimes as special spaces. I'm not sure that's going to work. And the sensory room's totally out. It's like a gymnasium, so that room never is a possibility. It's got a trapeze usually, and it's for kids who need to use that to, calm down and for other things. So that's not a room. So I'm not sure any of those rooms that I'm seeing are really viable options for you to share as a resource room, because that teacher too has equipment and things she's using, unless you want her to always exist on a cart, and that's difficult as well. So that's my thought. It seems to me the idea that you had with that partition, with that large room, just hearing the concerns of the educator and the other educators that I've talked to, that would come close to solving the concern. If we
Okay.
could ask them to go back, that would be a good option, rather than looking for rooms that are other people that I think, when you put all those buildings together, I think, we can't say what the number is, but they're gonna be utilized a lot. Maybe not all the time, but most of the time, I would tell you.
Okay.
So that's my thought on that, and I thought that was a great idea you had.
I mean, the divider, you know, it's, you know, if we just say $50,000 to do a room like that and we pick 2 rooms, I mean, obviously, you know, to Fred's point, yeah, we may start identifying younger, but we're not now, and the bubble now is 4th and 5th grade, so why not hit where you know what you're dealing with now? So if, you know, if we were to look at it, why not say, okay, the 4th and 5th grade resource room, what does that look like if we did the dividers in there and maybe bumped them out a little bit to give it a little more room, and, you know, and then you're talking about a modest cost, $100,000, you know, in a $40 million building. It's not too egregious, but it does introduce a little more flexibility and address some concerns that were brought up.
Seems to me that's what the building's about anyway.
Well, we've got 1 resource room for 4th and 5th. One for 4th, 1 for 5th?
Yes.
Okay, so we'd be doing both 4th and 5th.
One question I have, I'm not an educator. When we get to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we have 2 collaborative spaces instead of 1. Is there any cross functionality between a collaborative space and what would happen in a resource room, or are they 2?
It could be, I mean, from my experience, Joe, I would speak, yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. It's not a daily thing you wanna get into, but it definitely is some space that could be used that way, right?
Absolutely.
One other quick observation.
Yeah,
I
sure.
mean, that whole wonderful discussion that just happened about all the things that happen in all those other rooms, those are the same kids that are in the head count we use to establish the homerooms, correct? So,
Yes.
unless I'm wrong, in my mind, I start thinking, okay, well, we're, you know, you start bumping 23, 24, 25 to 1, but there's just as good a likelihood that 2 or 3 of those kids
Hold out.
spend a good portion of their
Right.
day somewhere else. So, again, I don't have a horse in the race, but just in terms of
Right.
the internal anxiety about that ratio, the reality is the number might be a couple less than whatever we fear it might be.
There's one other thing too, is just to compare, you know, I think you should be proud of the fact that this design is much more robust than a state school. So if this was a state co-funded school, you would get 2, and they call it itinerant personnel spaces. They would probably be located by the front office, and your speech therapist, your English as a second language, all of those spaces would use those 2 spaces in the entire building. You're providing them right in the grade houses for the children. And I mean, and now we're talking about even providing a more robust resource room. So I think that you are going, you know, I commend you for paying attention to the special education students, both gifted and remedial. So it's good. And if, like you said, policy ever changes, they're just rooms. You can use them for whatever you like.
We talked about special ed and regular classrooms. How do we teach gifted?
And well, it's supposed to be push in, that's the model that's going for. Currently, it's, and where I teach is out. I have a classroom and I teach it and the kids come to me. Here, what do we do?
So we kind of changed our model, and so it used to be that we had self-contained classrooms starting at 4th and 5th grade, and the kids were self-contained and they would move together. And so what we changed that for is to a model where the gifted children who are identified are in all regular classrooms. They come together every single day for their math, if that's where they're identified, and then they go back into their regular classrooms, and then the kids come together every day for their language arts instruction, and then go back into the regular classrooms. So we put a room, because we do that in 4th and 5th grade, in the 4th and 5th grade house for that same model to occur. So kids would be pulled from all 5th grade classes, come together for their language arts, go back into the regular, come together for their math, and go back into the other. So we have a gifted identified room in the 4th and 5th grade grade house to accommodate that model.
What about 3rd and 4th?
3rd and 4th, it's a pull-out model. So if they're in 3rd grade, they get pulled out for its enrichment services. It's not necessarily direct instruction. So we don't identify kids until 3rd grade or start servicing them. We identify in 2nd, we service in 3rd, but it's an enrichment model. And so we do an after-school science club with them, or we'll pull them out for enrichment gifted services. It's not that they're taking any coursework per se in 3rd grade.
So for 4th and 5th, there's an additional classroom?
There is.
Separate from those 10
Correct.
homerooms?
Yes.
For gifted?
Yes.
You can change your model based on what you want it to be. The state just says that the person has to be, the gifted intervention specialist has to be in front of the children a certain amount of hours. But what you're doing
is up to the district.
So that room would be used then for language arts and then used for math? and-
Correct.
Okay.
Because typically it's the same teacher who's teaching both, and in our cases, we have it different here, but I mean, it would typically be the same teacher. So that teacher would have teach gifted math, and then they go back, and then maybe there's another section. And typically, the way we're envisioning that is that that teacher would teach both 4th and 5th grade gifted. So that room will be occupied most of the day by that teacher, but it would be different kids moving in and out in different grade levels.
Just like a classroom, same size
Correct.
as a classroom.
So basically that teacher that would be her classroom.
Correct.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
No.
We've talked about everything else.
So, Chris, I have a question, so if, let's say the board said, let's 4th and 5th resource rooms, we wanted the divider in it.
Sure.
And, it's gonna end up X number of dollars, let's call it $100,000. And of course, we're gonna get further down this process where we're gonna get the budgetary numbers gonna come in. So is that something that if the board were to give you that direction and you design that in, does that mean that, if we gotta make trade-offs because of budgetary, could that be pulled back out easily, or is that like, nah, at this point, if you put it in there, it's really, you don't wanna pull it back out?
Yeah, what I would suggest, in most cases, what happens is, the tough part is putting the steel to support the wall. If this wall is $20,000, then what you do is just not put in the wall. Put in all the other infrastructure, get ready, at any time in the future, you can come and add the
Stuff it
wall,
in.
and you save yourself some money.
Put in the extra bed, put in the extra sprinkler
Right,
head.
that's,
Okay.
right.
It all
Put in
adds
the
up, but
door.
it's peanuts in the grand scheme of things
Right.
compared to the door.
Yeah, those kind of things though would be really, again, it would add to our ability to flexible.
It would-
Down the road, right.
Yeah.
Right, so meaning that, it may be $100,000 of extra costs, and then if we get farther down and say, okay, we need to make some cuts, maybe you're getting back 80, but you're leaving 20 in to put some of the
Yep.
structural, and those are just
Yeah.
numbers, but that's what you're saying is,
Right, and so typically in our core meetings, after we would finish this estimate on the design development set, we would sit through the core meeting and develop a gigantic list of value engineering options, because we're gonna be over the budget, we all know that. I mean, even prices everywhere. We just did the guaranteed maximum price for Brunswick's new school, and it was over, so there were some sacrifices they had to make to get it back within, and hopefully with bid day savings, we can buy some of that back. So what we would do is come to the board with the results of that core meeting of saying, this is the budget we're at, however, we've got these options that we selected, and there'll be 3 options. So for every, let's just say, this movable thing that we're talking about right now, one option would be, get rid of it, we don't want it. The second option is, let's bid it as an alternate. So we'll get a price on it, if we can afford it, we'll accept it at the time of bidding. Or the third is, we want it no matter what. So you'll have those 3 options for each one of our value engineering things, and we're gonna go through flooring, we're gonna go through different kinds of block and brick, I mean, every kind of roofing options and everything like that to get the project within budget, but then also give you the choice to put money back into the project if you want to.
Okay, so did we give you direction? Do we have consensus on the resource rooms? On what we would like them to do? Right now,
Like I
we'll
said,
just go back and.
To me, the only thought would be if we thought we might need that flexibility in another wing, the second, third rank, put one of them there instead of both of them in 4th and 5th, but that just,
Right now, we've got a need for 4th and 5th. I think we could set those rooms up to be like that, like Mark talked about.
really have to design.
Well, see, I'm with you, I think it seems more prudent to go ahead and do it all the way down.
But
The
my
grades.
thing is still a total of 2,
Right,
yeah.
right, but you said not just 4th and 5th, you also
Yeah,
said the other.
one for 4th and 5th.
he's saying, put only one. Well, the 2 ideas on the table is, we're only doing 2,
Okay,
and you either put them in 4th and 5th, where your bubble is right now.
right,
Or what Mike's suggesting is just do 1 in either the 4th or the 5th resource room and drop 1 down into either the 2nd or the 3rd.
And I
grade
just throw that as
resource
an
room.
option. Again, Joelle talked about trying to identify kids sooner,
Right,
which might mean then we might need it there, but
And don't forget, the kids can walk. At the end of the day, no matter what you do, if it doesn't happen in their grade house, they can walk to the next grade house and have services there if they had to. So it doesn't really, I mean, the location is arbitrary just because the kids can walk to different places in the building if they have to go there.
because we
So-
have it ideally set up and that's
Correct.
what you're saying, but that doesn't mean that.
Right, I mean, it
Okay.
doesn't mean that at
Okay.
all.
I say since we see the 4, 5, I think we put it there, in
Okay.
the 4th and 5th. And to her point, I mean,
If
then
we
that's
need-
what happens.
We get a bubble of 3rd grade and they have to walk to the 4 or 5, grade house for services, they have to walk to 4 or 5, it's no big deal.
Makes sense.
That's fine.
So
Yeah, I
That's-
I gave you direction.
agree with
Mhm.
adding to the 4, 5. I'm trying to make them a little bit bigger if you can.
So we're finishing our design development package this Friday. This is a minor change. We can deal with this through estimating without changing all the Revit model and everything. So both of our teams independently will be estimating here for the next month or so. Then we're gonna come together and line up those estimates and reconcile. So we're gonna agree on how much steel costs and stuff like that. Then we start the value engineering exercise I just spoke about. So at the design development, right now we're shooting for June, I think, for our design development presentation, if we can get this done in time. We'd like to come and be able to say, here's the current design, showing the classrooms that we just talked about, presenting the estimate to you, and then schedule. And only after we get approval from the board will we move into creating those bid documents. So, and the only reason I say that is it's a little bit atypical from a normal process. Normally, we would be already creating the bid documents and working, and that compresses the schedule. This is going to extend it a little bit, but I think that
Extended to the point that it's gonna hurt our target opening possibly?
well, it could, but I also think that you're we also have that elephant hanging out there, the wetlands. So we're trying to gather where that permitting process
Right.
stands, and just because you haven't had the pleasure of scrutinizing the budget on this building design, so you've got the schematic design budget, but that was so long ago, it's a completely different building now. So I would think you'd want to make those really tough decisions before we start creating the bid documents. I think it's prudent. It does put in jeopardy the opening of the building that fall, but I think that the wetlands may as well. So I wouldn't want to push you to make a decision and then realize that we're going to be waiting anyways, I guess is my.
Okay,
And in the meantime, we will be in contact with the wetlands folks and see exactly where they are in the permitting process and what that looks like, how successful they're being in expediting it.
Well, and as a board, right, we don't want to slow you down in any
For sure.
way, shape, or form. So you need to let us know at any point, right? We'll gather and meet. If we have a quorum to give direction, if we're working on a tight timeline. So when we get farther down that road, if you need more direction from the board, we got to make decisions on value engineering. Let us know. We'll get together and we'll put a stake in the ground.
Okay. Very well.
okay.
So I did have one other question, and that relates to, what we can and can't post publicly, right? So I know there was a presentation that was given, and there was some concern about, are we allowed to post that or are we not? And not just today, but going forward, we're gonna get more documents, we're gonna get more refinements, right? People in the community would like to see more, but we know there's safety and security concerns too. So can you maybe just speak a little bit about what are we allowed to post? What do you recommend, and what should we hold back?
Sure. So, it is a touchy subject, but by the time you occupy the building, you're going to be posting tornado evacuation maps in every classroom anyways. I don't think, and for anybody to walk in and snap a picture of that, the floor plans are going to be accessible, I guess is what I'm saying. In my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, you may want to ask your legal counsel, but in my opinion, we presented that in public, it's public records, right? Somebody could say, I'd like to do a public records request and get that presentation. It's public.
It's already on Facebook, people
Sure.
are pushing it out all over.
Sure.
It's unstoppable at this point in time.
But our attorney did advise that we do not post the floor plan, so
That's fine,
that
yeah.
was on our
Right.
attorney's advice, so that, that's why I posed the question to you, do you want it in there, that
But-
he advised that we don't ever do that.
He said don't.
He did.
But he said don't post the floor plan that was presented in the presentation
Well,
this past, because that was a very simplified, very high level floor plan versus a very detailed.
Sure.
Yeah, he
He
did.
did.
I didn't ask him that specific question, like that particular one, but just his general was, do not post your floor plans, because you know, basically tells every person in the world where your kids are located.
It's logical.
Even high level, if it's, you know, we've identified K1, so if you were after a kindergarten kid, you knew exactly what part, even on that very high level floor plan, knew exactly where a kindergartner kid would be in that
Well,
building.
and
Yeah.
going forward, maybe we should need to rethink how we do business. You know, we're videoing, something new we're adding to, if it was just audio and we knew that you were going to be presenting very specific things, maybe we don't use video for that meeting, just because, I mean, I don't need a lawyer to tell me. It's logical. If I wanna hurt children, that's a good way to like find out how that building's set up, and I'm handing them a cookie and saying, you know, here it is. So I think we need to really just be much more careful.
Personally, I think we need to vet this out more. Like, did the lawyer say that it's a legal requirement that we shouldn't post it, or was he just giving his opinion like I wouldn't
Safety and
suggest?
security department requirement. It's a safety and security.
Floor plans are not subject to public records.
I understand that,
Okay.
but what was presented was not the full-blown floor plan. It actually, as Chris was saying, when the building opens, there'll be floor plans for tornado exit and stuff that somebody could come in and snap a picture of. And what was presented to us, which is gonna change, you know, was a very high level. So it's a balance of the need, because, you know, we've got people that are saying, I wanna see the detail. Where's the detail? I wanna see the detail. You can come to the meeting, they present something at public, so are we gonna say, well, now we're gonna show anything? You know, somebody can walk into the building, so I don't know what the right answer is, but, you know, we're trying to be transparent, but we don't wanna be irresponsible and post something that shouldn't be, so we're trying to strike that balance. You can go too far down the one side, and if we're saying what was already presented in a public meeting, which is a very high level, a few, you know, pictures that were very, you know, high level, that we don't even wanna post that, even though some of that's gonna change, we need to, as a board, we need to figure out what are we going to post, because then if we're not gonna post that, we're not gonna post anything.
Listen,
No, it's not, I disagree with that, Mark. I
Okay.
mean, we all weighed in on this based on Joelle's email last Friday, and everybody else said we don't wanna post
listen,
that.
if somebody has an issue, and we just tell them, this is a security thing. If somebody in our community wants to put our children in jeopardy, because that's the way I see it, by me giving somebody that, then they can come up here and talk to us and have a discussion. And we can lay it out and show them that. But we need to batten the hatches. People are taking pictures of our videos, putting them on their Facebook with 1,000 views. It's being pushed out there. To me, I think our community would tell us, if they understood what the concern was, would you please stop? And so as high level as that picture is, that's a nice roadmap for somebody if we continue on doing that. So I think we need, when we have videos, we don't use them when we know that we're doing it. Just those extra things to make sure our kids are safe. And if somebody has an issue, I'll personally come up here and sit with them and let them look through everything they want to see. We're not being secretive, we're being protective of our kids. And that's the way I see it. I don't know.
I was just saying, what does the board anticipate down the road? Because we're gonna get, so are we saying, like, what is the board willing to share with the community, I guess is my question. I understand the board weighed in on this presentation, we don't want, although we didn't have feedback from everybody on whether it was a legal requirement or not, but and we don't have to decide it right now, but what I'm saying is we're gonna get more detail. Community is gonna wanna have more questions, more insight into what's going on, and the board needs to think about, what are we willing to post? Are we willing to post anything? I mean, just out of curiosity, Chris, you've done a lot of these buildings. What have other boards done? Have they, there's not a right or wrong answer. You can lock it down or not. I don't know.
And we have to remember that most people can't read floor plans. I mean, and just the layperson has a hard time deciphering scale and stuff. A lot of times what we do is post a low-res version of the animation of the building. And that gives a good view of what the building's gonna look like from the outside, from the inside, and it's a nice presentation of the building without actually giving a full
Because you
plan.
lose your bearings when you're doing that. If
turn
you're
around.
not quite sure, yeah, so it's not, but that picture you had for us, which I thought it was labeled fine, I mean, and that's too, to me, as a board member, that's too specific. That's too, that's the way I say, I don't know.
Well, and I kind of think, I don't really care what other school districts did prior to February 14th of 2018, but what happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, I think, is how we deal with this on a going forward basis. So I don't care what people did in 2016 and 2017. We have to, like, we had that happen last year, and that's how I, am gonna weigh in on that particular issue.
So something specific. What about the animation
Yeah,
that
that's
they
fine.
had?
Yeah, I think
Outside
that
the
gives you a
building.
feeling for the building without telling you, here's where we keep our,
Right.
kindergarten.
And it's for public safety, it's not for lack of transparency, and I
Right.
think if you are going to be showing videos of the building, please give us a heads up, and what that will be, and then this board will have to make a decision, and we just won't videotape that part of the meeting, or we won't videotape that meeting, we'll just do audio.
Well, I think kind of moving forward too, I mean, since the floor plan has already kind of been set, when you look at design development, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's more gonna be about what do those interior spaces look like. So if you have pictures of here's what the inside of a classroom is gonna look like, here's what an art room is gonna look like, here's what the media center is gonna
The
look like.
windows and
The
the
win, yeah, and
doors
just,
and
snapshots as opposed to actually showing the floor plan again, because I think, that ship has sailed in terms of what that was gonna look like. There might not be a need to even
Right.
have that as part of the presentation, but just, people want details, they wanna see what are the classrooms gonna look like, what is the entryway gonna
So
look
here's a
like?
typical, here's what our classroom's gonna look like,
Exactly,
rather
so-
than putting it
Correct.
into the floor plan itself.
Yeah, like
is
here's a
what you're
sample of
saying.
a kindergarten room, here's what a preschool room looks like, here's what a second grade classroom looks like, and kind of do snapshots as opposed to laying out that floor plan again to show that detail and to show that
Right.
we're being transparent, like here's the detail that you wanted to see, here's what
Right.
it looks like, a picture of the outside and, just kind of those details without going into, more of that technical stuff.
Okay,
Yeah, that's great, and we'll provide you anything you need. And then typically the VE discussion doesn't really happen in a public board meeting either. That's why I kind of said that happens in the core meeting. And then at the board level, it comes into we're on budget or we're X amount of dollars over budget, and there may be a large decision. It might be, the discussion you had about the preschool earlier was a very appropriate board discussion. But when it gets down to value engineering and talking about different types of flooring, different types of, sometimes I can get into security issues too, different types of glazing and stuff like that. So we would typically like to keep that in a core meeting as well.
now when you send us documents and examples of things, did you say those are public record requests or they're not? Would it be smart to copy our lawyer on that way it would be protected?
I would ask a lawyer, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, ask a lawyer, not copy.
Oh, not ask,
It's
but why not copy the lawyer
It's
so
not
that?
really a legal decision.
Because sometimes you can't dodge just
And if-
by copying your attorney.
If they're a part of the email, then it's not protected, only our communications with
Okay.
the lawyer are protected.
Well, so somebody could ask for that.
Sure.
I mean, the reality is that presentation that was already public, Jeff could get a public records request for a copy of it. And so I think we need to,
Yeah, but
we,
you can say no. I mean, you don't have to respond to everything. I mean, the statute says you provide what's not confidential. You don't have to provide that plan just because somebody asks for it.
you have to provide it if it's not considered a confidential
Right,
document.
but safety and security, that's a specific exception,
Right, no, I get that.
so.
I just didn't see from, if we could talk about it later, but I wanna get in writing from the lawyer that says that presentation is a safety
But the
and
majority
security.
doesn't, the majority
no.
says.
He
No,
told
It's just
so.
a question.
Yeah, he
It's
did
not,
tell
it's not
us
saying we're
last
gonna
year.
post it. It's just a question about this particular document. Is it construed, can it be construed as a safety and security issue that does not need to be provided as a public record? It's
Okay.
just a question. I
Would
wanna
you
know
do
the
that?
answer to it.
Yes,
Doesn't mean.
I can do that. I can do that.
Anything
Thank
else?
you. Sorry, I made you sit here.
Yeah,
No,
sorry.
good discussion.
No, this is important, I'm not sorry, thank you very much. All right.
No, just that we didn't move anything.
Yeah.
I would've liked this.
We did a
The resource
lot.
room, that's true, the
We
resource
did a
room.
lot.
We didn't, they
You
weren't
should
here.
be,
when
you
we
should be
were planning
thanking you,
plans.
Mike, for not moving anything. He should be thanking you for not moving anything.
Oh, we could go back.
All right.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Did we, and Chris is rightfully asking about some of the summer improvements and stuff that we would like to start designing. Is there anything that the board feels comfortable releasing us on? Or?
Well, there's a resolution next week
Okay,
for the fire alarm
okay.
that you guys are going
Right.
to agenda review this
Right.
evening.
That's certainly.
We're gonna do that after this meeting.
Gotcha. Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
all right,
Thank you.
so we have item 4, closing items. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So,
Second. Okay. Roll call?
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Zupa? Yes. Mr. Dozen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. We're now adjourned. Thank you very much for your time.
Sure, thank
Everybody have a
Myra.
happy and blessed